I stood in the living room of the house I spent my entire life building, holding a small box with my last belongings, when my daughter-in-law jabbed a finger at the door and said, "You're nothing but a burden now. We've carried you long enough. Take your things and go." I looked to my son, expecting him to speak up, but he stayed quiet. That night, they celebrated getting rid of me until 50 unpaid bills came back to haunt them. Welcome to Alpha Dad Stories. I'm glad you found your way here today. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. When someone you love lets you down, do you tend to confront them right away, or do you pull back and wait until you're sure of what you're dealing with? Just drop a word or two. I read everyone. Now, a quick note: this story draws on real patterns of family betrayal and financial harm, but dramatic elements have been added for the purposes of storytelling. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. It's the deeper truth inside the story that I hope stays with you. 68 years of living taught me two things: when to hold my tongue and when to simply leave. That Friday evening in June, standing in the doorway of the house I'd built from nothing, from decades of sweat and careful saving, I finally grasped the difference between them. I had a cardboard box in my arms, and somewhere behind me, somewhere deep in that house, a champagne cork snapped against the ceiling. The box wasn't heavy. 2 dress shirts, a shaving kit, the framed photograph of Vivian and me on our wedding day, and a Bible with a worn leather cover that had sat on my nightstand for 40 years. That was what Naomi had laid out for me. One box. As if I were a parcel being shipped back to wherever I came from. Tidy, efficient, no feeling required. Well, I think we've all said what needs to be said, Leonard. Naomi stood at the kitchen archway, arms folded, one manicured nail tapping her elbow in that slow and deliberate rhythm she used when she wanted you to know her patience had run out. She had on an ivory blazer and earrings that probably cost more than my first car. This arrangement simply isn't working anymore. My throat went tight, like something had closed hard around it. I looked past her to Garrett, my son, 42 years old, standing near the foot of the staircase, hands buried in his pockets, the way a teenager stands when he's hoping a storm will just blow over. He was wearing the leather loafers I'd bought him for his birthday, polished, not a scuff on them. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Garrett." My voice came out rougher than I had intended. "You have something to say." He cleared his throat, shifted his weight. "Dad, it's complicated. You know how things have been. Complicated." I let the word sit there quietly, turning it over. "All right. You leave the stove on." Naomi cut in, stepping closer, her voice honing to an edge. "You confuse Cody with your stories. You wander around at 3 hours in the morning and wake the whole house." She tilted her chin up just slightly, the way she always did when she wanted to appear like the sensible one. "You're 68, Leonard. Maybe it's time to think about what's actually best for everyone. Best for everyone." My chest clenched so hard, I had to breathe through it slowly and carefully. I thought about the mortgage on this house, the one I'd signed in 2017. The one I'd emptied 30 years of savings to make possible because Garrett said Naomi needed a home that reflected where they were headed in life. I thought about the electric bill, the water, the internet, the insurance, all of it drawn from my account every single month for 6 years. Best for everyone. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. Not pleading, just asking. Naomi smiled. Not a real one. The kind that only lives at the surface, practiced and cold, like a stage expression. "You have the store, Leonard. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out." Then she said it. "The thing I will carry until I can't carry anything anymore." "You're a senile parasite, Leonard. A useless old fogey who just eats and shits. We've carried you long enough. It's time for you to go." The words landed somewhere below my ribs. My hands went cold, Not the cold of anger, but the cold of a man who has just had confirmed something he hadn't wanted to believe. My jaw locked. My back teeth ached. I looked at my son one last time. His face had gone red, and for one foolish, hopeful moment I waited. Waited for him to step forward, to say something, to be the man I'd spent my entire life trying to raise. He looked at the floor. I walked out. The night air was warm and dense, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass and charcoal smoke drifting over from a neighbor's grill 2 houses down. I set the box on the porch railing, found my car keys, and pressed them into my palm until I felt the metal teeth bite. My hands were shaking, not from age, from something I had no name for yet. Something suspended between grief and fury, still deciding which direction it would fall. And then I heard it. A cork. That sharp, bright crack bouncing off the walls inside, spilling out through the screen door into the night. The quick rush of champagne being poured. And then Naomi's voice, high and ringing, lit up in that particular way it only ever got when she felt she'd won. To peace and quiet. Finally, Garrett's laugh came after, low, at first hesitant, then loosening and filling out. The clink of glasses. I stood on that porch with my one box, my keys, my trembling hands, and I listened to my family celebrate the fact that I was gone. My legs felt as though the earth had shifted beneath me. My eyes burned sudden and hot. I pressed my lips together and fixed my gaze on the streetlight at the end of the driveway until the feeling settled enough to let me move. 68 years old. 30 years of savings. 2 shirts and a Bible and a wedding photograph. And inside that house, my son was drinking champagne. I put the box in the back seat of my Oldsmobile, buckled myself in, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and sat in the dark of my own car, in the driveway of my own house. I didn't pull away right then because something quiet was pressing at the edge of my thoughts. Persistent. Insistent. A number. Or more accurately, a question tied to a number. How many accounts still had my name attached to them inside that house? The electric. The water. The internet. The insurance on Garrett's SUV. The phone plan. The cable. The gas. I hadn't looked, not truly looked, in months. The figure forming in my chest wasn't a small one. And I had a feeling it was about to matter in ways none of us were ready for. The lights in that house burned all night. I could see every one of them from where I sat. I don't know how long I stayed parked in that driveway before I finally shifted into reverse and drove away. Long enough for the champagne laughter inside to go silent. Long enough for the upstairs windows to go dark one by one. Long enough to understand that nobody was coming out to check on me. I drove to the parking lot of Pruitt's Market, my store 2 miles from the house. A squat brick building with my name still stenciled above the door in faded green letters. I didn't go inside. I just sat in the dark with the engine off and let the past come washing back the way it always does when you've been keeping it at a careful distance for too long. Vivian used to say I had a gift for not dealing with things. Leonard Pruitt. She'd tell me, standing in the kitchen with a dish towel slung over her shoulder. You could have a hole in your roof and wait 3 weeks to think about whether it's raining. She always said it with warmth, though. Always warmly. That was Vivian. She knew every one of my failings and loved me in spite of them, which remains the rarest thing I have ever seen a person do. She passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the kind that doesn't leave room for negotiation. 61 days from diagnosis to the morning. I sat beside her hospital bed and held her hand while she stopped breathing. I have not spoken about those 661 days with anyone. Not Garrett, not anyone. Some things you simply carry. I thought about her funeral. How Garrett had wept openly at the graveside, shoulders heaving, the picture of a devastated son. And then 6 days later, 6 days he called me while I was still sleeping on Vivian's side of the bed, because I hadn't been able to make myself move to the middle yet. "Dad," he said, voice carefully measured. "I was thinking now might be a good time to talk about the estate, just so we have a clear picture." I told myself then that grief made people practical. I told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded. That was the kind of man I was, the kind who extended the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt was the size of a barn door. Naomi had decided Garrett needed a home that matched their status, her word status. And Garrett had come to me wearing the kind of smile that meant he'd already settled on the answer before he ever asked the question. "Dad, you've got the savings. The store's doing well. Wouldn't it be something to see your son in a real home?" And I had said yes, because he was my son. Because I had wanted to believe that giving him something solid might make him into something solid. I sold 60% of the store's operating equity to free up the funds. I signed the mortgage myself because Garrett's credit wasn't strong enough to qualify for the loan. Everything I gave him had been earned the hard way. Years of grinding every dollar stacked on the one before it until it amounted to something real. I transferred that to my son's hands because the love I had for him outweighed anything I'd accumulated. Then I took the smallest room at the back of that house and quietly resumed paying the bills. Harvey, my accountant, retired now for some years, used to shake his head at me. "You're too generous, Leonard." He had a saying about it: generosity without a ceiling isn't kindness. It's a weakness other people walk through. I never paid that enough attention. 6 mornings a week I had breakfast on the table for that household. When Naomi was too caught up in whatever Naomi was caught up in, I was the one picking Cody up from school, sitting beside him at the kitchen table going over his spelling words. I watched cartoons I couldn't make heads or tails of, just so the boy wouldn't be sitting there by himself. That was my life in that house. I was the furniture serviceable, invisible, only missed when something stopped working. A set of headlights swung across my windshield as a truck rolled through the lot. I blinked. My eyes had that hot, prickling feeling again, and this time I didn't try to will it away. I let the whole weight of the night press down on me, the cardboard box behind me on the seat. The door I'd just been locked out of, the sound of that cork still echoing somewhere in my chest. I reached for my phone, not to dial anyone, to open the banking app, the one tied to my personal retirement account, the fund I'd been quietly feeding for 20 years, the one I'd kept walled off, separate from every household account, every joint filing, every extension of trust I'd granted. Mine. Just mine. The screen blinked to life slowly. I held it up in the dark and squinted at it. The balance read 0. I sat with that for a long stretch, not reacting, just staring. My heart didn't race. It dropped. Slowly, the way old timber goes, one beam at a time. That account had carried $50,000 in it 8 months ago. I remembered the exact moment I'd checked, logged in, noted the interest, told myself things weren't entirely lost. $50,000. Now 0. My grip on the phone went tight. Part of me reached for some innocent explanation, a system lag, a display error, something corrupted in the app. But I'd kept my own ledgers since I was 25, and a 0 balance doesn't appear on its own. That kind of 0 is made, deliberately, by someone. Vivian. I said it quietly out loud to the empty parking lot outside a store where she used to show up every Friday with a brown bag and a mason jar of sweet tea, rain or shine. "I think I made some real bad decisions, sweetheart." The night held nothing back. It never does. But beneath the numbness and the cold, working its way into my knuckles, something else was stirring. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more purposeful than anger. The early tentative shape of a plan, Dawn found me still in the driver's seat nearly 5 hours after I'd parked. My spine ached from the angle I'd been sitting at. There was a knot in my neck that punished me every time I moved my head, and the gas station coffee I'd picked up at 4:00 in the morning had long since gone to room temperature in the cup holder. I was 68 years old with one cardboard box and no bed to go to. 2 blocks up from Pruitt's Market sat the Ridgecrest boarding house. I'd passed it for years, glimpsed it from the road, registered it without really taking it in. A 2-story craftsman with gray trim that needed repainting, a small hand-lettered sign by the door, a porch with 2 wooden chairs that looked as though no one had sat in them in a decade. I pulled into the lot at 6:00 in the morning, stayed in the car a few minutes longer, pressed my thumbs into my eye sockets until the burning eased, then grabbed my box and went to knock. The man who came to the door was tall and spare, early 70s at a guess, with the bearing of someone who had spent a career in rooms where slouching was not permitted. Silver hair, reading glasses resting on his forehead, a coffee mug already in his hand as if he'd heard the knock coming and poured himself one in preparation. "Help you?" No suspicion in it, just the plain question. "I need a room, short term, cash today if that suits you." He looked me over the way you'd read a document, methodical, taking in details. The box tucked under my arm, the slept-in crease of my shirt, the car keys pressed into my palm. "Edmund Rafferty." He put out his hand. "Leonard Pruitt." I took it. Something behind his eyes shifted, quiet like a page being turned. "Pruitt's Market over on Forest Avenue." "That's right. 11 years I've been buying produce there." He swung the door back. "Come in, Mr. Pruitt. Room on the 2nd floor. Coffee's hot." The Ridgecrest was orderly inside and hushed with a lemon polish smell that reminded me of old office buildings. Edmund led me to a reception desk near the entry, noted down my information, named a weekly rate that was more than reasonable, and laid a brass key on the counter. "Room 3C, 3rd door on the left. The bathroom's shared, but your only neighbor on that floor works the night shift, so in practice it'll be yours." I'm grateful. Without ceremony, he poured a second mug and set it in front of me. Then he settled himself against the doorframe of the back room, his own mug raised, and watched me with the particular patience of someone whose knowledge runs ahead of his questions. "You'll forgive me for coming straight to the point," Edmund said. "But a man doesn't show up at 6 in the morning with a box under his arm if everything was already settled." My jaw went tight. I held the warm mug with both hands. "No," I said. "Nothing was settled. Family?" he asked. That single word dropped into the room and spread. I breathed through it. My son. His wife. The house was mine in every way that counted, just not in the way that protected me. Something in Edmund's expression didn't change, and yet a quality entered it. The focused clinical alertness of someone who has just heard a familiar set of symptoms. He put his mug down on the counter. "What was your line of work before the store, Mr. Pruitt?" "Construction, then retail. I've been running my own operation since I was 35. Before I retired," Edmund said, "I practiced financial law for 34 years. Elder asset protection was my specialty." He lifted his mug again, almost as an afterthought. "I raise that because the picture you've described, your name carrying accounts in a household that just put you out, it isn't unusual. I've sat across from it more times than I can count. The constriction in my chest came on fast enough to be physical." "You're telling me this is something that happens?" "I'm telling you it has a name." Edmund said, his tone level and deliberate. "And the question that matters most right now is this: how many accounts bear your signature that you haven't actually reviewed in the past 6 months?" I started to answer, stopped. The truth was, I had no idea. I'd been so consumed by the machinery of it all, the payments, the renewals, the automatic drafts, the forms I signed, without sitting down first, that the full count had never once crossed my mind as something I needed to know. That recognition moved through me like cold water. My knuckles whitened against the mug. "I don't know," I said. The words landed with the weight of something long overdue. Edmund walked to a cabinet beside the reception desk, drew open a drawer, and produced a manila folder, blank, empty, cream-colored. He placed it in front of me on the counter. "Then that," he said, with the steadiness of a man who has delivered that exact line many times before, or is precisely where we begin. I stared at the folder. Through the window, the town was coming awake, the groan of a garbage truck working its way down the block, a radio bleeding through someone's open window, the ordinary sound of a Saturday morning assembling itself around a world that had no idea what the night before had taken from me. I picked up the folder. I picked up my coffee. Then I climbed the stairs to room 3C and began making calls. Edmund extended me 2 days a coffee pot that never seemed to reach the bottom and the use of his printer. What those 48 hours uncovered didn't hit me all at once. It worked the way erosion works, not with force, but with patience, wearing something solid down to its new shape. It began with the bank. Saturday morning early, I was at the little desk in room 3C with Edmund's empty folder spread open in front of me and a pen that kept skipping out. I called the customer service line for my retirement savings account. The woman who picked up was measured and kind, and she confirmed what the phone screen had already shown me: the balance was 0. I asked her to pull the transaction history for the previous 12 months. She put me on hold for 3 minutes. When she came back, she told me there had been 6 separate withdrawals between last September and this past February, each one between $7,000 and $10,000. Totaling $51,400. "Ma, can you tell me how those withdrawals were made?" I kept my voice even, steadier than I had any right to. "Yes, sir. They were processed as in-branch withdrawals authorized by signed withdrawal slips." My grip on the pen went so tight the cap cracked. "I didn't make those withdrawals." A brief silence. "Mr. Pruitt, if you believe these transactions were unauthorized, I'd recommend coming into a branch with your identification and requesting a fraud investigation. We can also freeze the account to prevent further activity." "It's already at 0, I said. "There's nothing left to prevent." She had no answer for that. I thanked her anyway and set the phone down. Across the small room, Edmund was seated in the wooden chair by the window, reading glasses on legal pad balanced on his knee. I told him what I'd just learned. In-branch withdrawals. I said, my throat tight around the words. Signed slips. My name. Edmund pressed his lips together and wrote something on his pad. "Did you sign them?" "No." It came out flat and hard. He looked at me over the tops of his glasses. "Then someone forged your signature 6 times at a bank counter. Under federal law, that constitutes bank fraud, potentially aggravated identity theft as well, which carries a mandatory minimum of 2 years in federal prison, on top of whatever the underlying fraud charge carries." He paused. "That's not a small thing, Leonard." Something heavy had settled onto my chest. No one had asked. No one had said a word. I pressed the heels of my hands against the desk edge and steadied my breathing. "Keep going," I said. "I need to know everything." We kept going. Edmund walked me through, pulling all 3 credit reports, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, which any American can request at no cost under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We laid the printed pages across the desk and went through them one line at a time. Edmund reading them aloud, both of us marking cross-referencing against bills I could remember and ones I couldn't place. "See, electric account, your name, service address, the house on Cedarwood Lane," Edmund said. "Yes, I opened that in 2017. See, water and sewer, same address." "Yes." "Internet. Premier cable account holder Leonard Pruitt." "Yes." "What a homeowner's insurance on the Cedarwood property." I pay it quarterly. Auto insurance, one vehicle, a 2020 SUV registered to Garrett Pruitt, policy co-holder Leonard Pruitt. I stopped. He said it was temporary, while he sorted out his own policy. Edmund noted it without comment, and we moved on. The gas account. 3 streaming subscriptions, all billed to a card in my name I had entirely forgotten about. A credit card I'd opened at Garrett's request in 2019 to cover some transition costs, currently carrying a balance of $4,200 in charges I couldn't account for. Then Edmund lifted a page from the far end of the stack and held it under the lamp. Leonard. His voice had gone careful. Are you aware of a credit account through a company called Meridian Financial Services, opened April of last year? My stomach dropped. No. So it appears to be a personal loan co-signed. He turned the page so I could see. $36,000. Primary borrower listed as Garrett Pruitt. He pointed to the signature line. Co-signer listed as Leonard Pruitt. I leaned in and studied the signature. My name. The letters were right, the spacing nearly right. But the angle was off. The HA loop on the way into the W sat at a slight backward tilt I have never once made. I have a particular habit at the close of that second loop that no one would know unless they'd spent considerable time practicing my hand and still hadn't landed it. That's not my signature, I said, very quietly. Not because I was managing myself, but because the fury had gone somewhere below the level where voices operate. Gone cold. Gone still. Edmund set the page down. He took off his glasses and folded them with deliberate care. Then he added a figure to the bottom of the legal pad, turned it around, and pushed it across the desk toward me. $86,000. $51,000 from the retirement account. $36,000 from the forged loan. Thousands more spread across accumulated bills and credit balances, something like 50 separate accounts, all carrying my name, all drawing on 68 years of patient, careful financial life. The question isn't whether they did this. Edmund set his voice low and level. What's sitting on this desk answers that. The question is what you want to do about it. I held that number with my eyes for a long time. My jaw ached. My eyes ached. Something inside my chest had gone entirely still. Not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of a man who has just seen the full shape of what was done to him and is turning over slowly and with great deliberateness the question of what he intends to do next. I want to be careful, I said at last. I want to be thorough, and I want every single one of them to feel it. Edmund studied me for a moment. Then he turned to a fresh page on the legal pad and picked up his pen. Then let's start building the case, he said. Edmund turned in by 9:00 that Sunday night. The house settled around me into a particular quiet, the refrigerator humming somewhere through the wall, a television murmuring faintly from the tenant down the hall. I sat at the desk in room 3C with the legal pad full of figures in front of me, the lamp throwing a yellow ring on the desktop, and I told myself I ought to sleep. Instead, I opened the other box. Not the one with my shirts. The one I had kept in my car for 3 years because it had never felt right to leave it anywhere it might not be safe. Vivian's things. A folded cardigan that still smelled faintly of her rosewater lotion if you pressed your face into it. A small wooden cross from her dresser. 3 photographs, and at the bottom, swaddled in tissue paper so old it had gone soft, a journal with a green cloth cover and a small brass clasp. I had never opened it, not in the 3 years since she'd gone. Vivian was a private person. She kept her interior life the way she kept her garden tended carefully and on her own schedule. I'd always honored that. It was one of the ways I showed her I understood her, but she was gone now. And something in me, not a thought exactly, more a pressure behind the ribs, told me she had left something on those pages she intended me to find. Not right away, when the moment arrived. My hands weren't steady as I worked the brass clasp. The pages were dense with her handwriting, small, precise, angled slightly, right the same hand that had addressed Christmas cards and left notes on the kitchen counter for 41 years. Seeing it closed my throat so suddenly that I had to set the journal down, press the back of my hand to my mouth, and simply breathe. "Lordum," I whispered, "help me hold it together." I turned to the final quarter of the journal, the entries from the last year of her life. October 14th. Naomi came into the kitchen while I was making Leonard's lunch and told me I was undermining our household by giving Leonard money for his personal account. I told her it was our money, Leonard's and mine, from long before she ever became part of this family. She gave me that smile, she has the one that carries no warmth in it at all, and said, "Vivian, you're not well. Everyone can see it. If you keep making things difficult, we may need to think about what's best for your care." My chest seized. My hands clenched the edges of the journal hard enough to bow the cover. I knew exactly what she meant. She meant the memory care facility on Highway 70 that she'd brought up twice already, once offhandedly, once with rather more deliberate weight. She meant that if I kept standing guard over Leonard's money, kept naming what was being taken, she would find a way to have me declared incompetent and push me out of this house for good. I am 60 years old. I misplace my reading glasses now and then. That is not a failing mind. That is a life being lived. Oh, Viv. Her name came apart in my mouth. I pressed my lips together until the feeling passed numb, and the tears I'd been banking for 3 days finally forced their way through. I let them come. There was nobody to witness it, and certain things have to be allowed to move through you, or they sink in and grow into something far harder to dislodge. I kept reading. November the 2nd. I tried again tonight to tell Leonard. I opened with, "Leonard, I think Naomi is..." And then I looked at his face, at all that love and trust sitting right there in his eyes, and the words dried up. He sees the best in that boy. He has always seen the best in Garrett. It is the finest quality he has, and the one that puts him most at risk. November 19th. She took money from the account again. I caught the notification on Leonard's phone while he was in the shower. $7,000. I've written it here because I have nowhere else to put it. I'm afraid, Leonard. I am afraid of what she is willing to do, and I am afraid of what the truth would break in you. So I am keeping it here instead. For safekeeping. For someday. My someday. I said it aloud. My voice was barely mind-cracked, worn down to something raw. January 8th. The doctor says the cancer has spread. I won't write about that here. What I will write is this, Leonard. If you are reading this, then someday has come. And I need you to hear me as plainly as I can put it into words. You are not weak. You are not foolish. You loved your son the way a good father does, without conditions, without armor. There is nothing wrong with that. But I need you to take up your armor now, my love. I need you to look at what has been done and not turn your eyes away from it. You are the strongest man I have ever known when you make up your mind to be. Make up your mind, Leonard. I love you. I am so sorry I couldn't say any of this to your face. I will find a way to say it on the other side. Vivian. I sat at that desk until the lamp flickered and the room dimmed around me. My face was wet. My chest felt scraped out and hollow. But underneath all that grief, underneath the raw and aching loss, something else had moved in. Something quiet and firm and not going anywhere. She had known. She had watched it unfold and had been too frightened of what honesty would cost me. And so she had carried all of it alone through the last years of her life. And she had still managed, even from that far edge, to reach across and put it in my hands at exactly the moment I needed it. I closed the journal. I held it against my chest with both hands. "I hear you, Viv," I said. "I'm decided. There is something about grief when it finally finishes with you, For the night, it leaves behind a clarity sharper than anything you had before you lay down. By Monday morning, the fog had lifted. I was up in room 3C at 50, washed my face, pulled on a clean shirt, and came downstairs to find Edmund already at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee beside him, and a stack of blank legal forms spread out flat. He glanced up as I came through the door, took in my face and gave a slow nod, the kind men of a certain age exchange when they recognize something they've witnessed before. "You slept," he said. "A few hours?" "Enough! Enough," I said and meant it. I poured myself a coffee and settled into the chair across from him. "Tell me what we do first." Edmund set his pen down and laced his fingers on the table. "There are 3 fronts," he said. "Legal, financial, and practical. We move on all 3 at once, but we move quietly. No calls to Garrett, no confrontations, no advance warning." "Agreed." The legal front, I've drafted the framework for an FTC identity theft report. You'll file it today at identitytheft.gov. It establishes an official federal record of the fraud and gives you legal standing to challenge every account opened or altered without your authorization. He slid a printed sheet across the table. We also freeze your credit at all 3 bureaus: Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. That blocks anyone from opening new accounts under your name while we work through the rest. How long does a freeze take? You do it online. Each bureau runs its own portal. It takes effect immediately once confirmed. Edmund tapped the tabletop. The financial front is the most critical piece. You remain the account holder of record on every utility and service tied to that house. That means you have both the right and the responsibility to contact each provider and update the billing. Updated how? Sukisa, redirect billing to the service address, the house on Cedarwood Lane, where the services are actually being consumed. His voice was level, unhurried. Right now, those bills are either auto-drafting from your account or landing at some P.O. box you set up years ago. We send them to the physical address instead. The providers have no stake in who lives there. They care about getting paid. Once the invoices start arriving at that house with no payment coming from your end, the providers will go after the occupants, which is Garrett and Naomi. Something loosened in my chest. Not quite relief. More like the feeling when you locate a knot and finally have your hands on it before it's undone. "How many accounts are we dealing with?" Edmund turned the legal pad toward me. The list ran the full length of the page. 50, he said. "Give or take." I stared at that number. 50 accounts. 50 lines I'd been silently holding for 6 years without once stepping back to count them. My stomach turned not in despair, but in something sharper. The recognition of my own blind faithfulness laid out in bullet points. "And the 3rd front?" I asked. "The practical one?" Edmund folded his hands. "I've been going through the mortgage documents. You brought me the ones from the 2017 purchase. Leonard, I need to examine the deed transfer paperwork more carefully before I say anything definitive. There's a clause in the original purchase agreement that caught my attention last night. Give me a day or 2 before I tell you what I think it means." He held my gaze steadily. "Can you trust me on that, Edmund?" I said, "You're the first person in this entire town who has looked at me like I'm a man with a solvable problem, rather than an old fool who stumbled into his own mess." "Yes. I trust you." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood of one. "Good. Then let's get to it." We spent the rest of the morning working through the list. Edmund sat beside me and walked me through each provider's process. Some took a phone call, some had online portals, some required a written request with an account number and identification. My handwriting covered 3 pages of the legal pad. By noon, I had successfully redirected 12 accounts: electric, water, gas, 2 streaming services, the internet provider, 2 insurance policies, and the family phone plan, which ran 4 lines too, of which I had never once used. Down. Edmund said, drawing a line through them on the master list with a red pen. Third of eight doing. There 8 to go, I answered. My voice was dry, but something was moving underneath it. Something that felt cautiously, tentatively like purpose. That afternoon, I drove to Pruitt's Market for the first time since Friday night. Troy, my manager, a dependable young man who'd been with me for 9 years, looked up from behind the counter when I came through the door. The relief that crossed his face was so open and unguarded, it nearly undid me. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "we weren't sure. I mean, we heard—" "I'm fine, Troy." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Everything's fine." "How are we looking on the produce delivery, Seawina?" He blinked. Then he straightened up, gave a nod, and got right back to business, because that's the kind of man he was. And partly because I think he understood that right now, ordinary was precisely what I needed. I worked the afternoon shift. I checked inventory. I talked with customers. I did everything I had been doing for 30 years. And I let the familiar weight of useful work settle across my shoulders like something I had earned and was not yet willing to put down. On the drive back to the Ridgecrest that evening, I reached into my shirt pocket and touched the folded list. 12 crossed off. 38 still waiting. And somewhere across town, the first billing cycle of the month was closing without my automatic payment attached to it. The clock had started, and for the first time since that Friday night, things were moving on my schedule. Over those next 2 weeks, I settled into a routine that Vivian would have known at a glance, and probably greeted with one of her quiet smiles, the kind she saved, for when she caught me being the man she always thought I was capable of being. She used to say I did my finest work when I had a proper system in place. Up at 5 hours, wash up. Head downstairs where Edmund kept the coffee pot running on a timer, so there was always a hot cup waiting by 5:15. 90 minutes on the phone before the store opened, work the floor through to closing. Back to the Ridgecrest and 2 or 3 more calls in the evening before the customer service lines shut down for the night. 38 bills don't move on their own, but they move one at a time if you stay patient and methodical, and if you can sit through 20 minutes of hold music without losing your composure. Electric's done. I told Edmund on the Wednesday of the first week, drawing the red pen through it on the master list. We designated that color for finished items. Good, he said, not lifting his eyes from the mortgage documents he'd been going over every evening. Gas, too. Called them yesterday. Takes 3 business days to process the redirect. I'll confirm Friday. Internet. Done Monday. Cable, too. And the 2 insurance policies on the house contents. I tapped the list. That's 17 total. Edmund set his pen down and glanced over my shoulder at the master sheet. You're moving efficiently. I have 30 years of practice managing accounts, I said. I just never imagined I'd be managing my way out of my own family. Edmund didn't answer that. He simply picked his pen back up and returned to his reading, which I had come to understand was his way of acknowledging something without pressing the bruise any deeper than it already went. It was a quality I had come to value greatly. The calls themselves were seldom complicated. Most utility companies have a process that is almost insultingly straightforward once you understand how it works. You confirm your identity as the account holder, social security number, account number, date of birth, and request a billing address update or an auto-pay cancellation. I was the account holder of record on every single one of those 50 accounts. I had set them up. I had signed the paperwork. I had been the one receiving statements for 6 years. That gave me every legal right to make exactly the changes I was making. What I was not doing, what Edmund had been very precise about from the start, was anything that could be construed as tampering, interference, or harassment. I was managing my own financial affairs, which is what I should have been doing for 6 years. It was Edmund who found the loan files on the Thursday of the second week. He'd been going through a box of financial records I'd been keeping in my car, alongside Vivian's things, a shoebox of old statements and paperwork I'd never had the will to sort through properly. He came to the kitchen table that evening, carrying 2 manila envelopes, and placed them in front of me without a word, simply tapping the dates printed on each one. "What are these?" I asked. "Open them," he said, and there was that particular careful steadiness in his voice that he got when the news waiting inside wasn't good. The first envelope held paperwork from a community bank, a personal loan I'd taken out in August of 2008 for $18,000. The purpose listed on the application written in my own hand: tuition and academic fees, Garrett R. Pruitt, Fall, semester 2008. I had borrowed money at 8% interest to put my son through college because his grades hadn't earned him a scholarship and his pride wouldn't let him start at a community college first. I paid that loan off over 4 years. Garrett had never returned a cent of it. The second envelope was from 2013. $12,000, the same bank, a slightly higher interest rate. Purpose relocation and professional placement fees, G. Pruitt. That was the year Garrett moved to the city for the position that Naomi had decided was beneath him 6 months later, when something with a better title came along. I had borrowed $12,000 to help my son build a life that his wife would soon determine wasn't sufficient. $30,000, Edmund said, settling into the chair across from me. Borrowed at interest from your own pocket for a son who swore he'd repay you. My jaw tightened until I felt the muscle in my cheek pull. I could hear Garrett's voice as plain as anything, that particular tone he used when he wanted something, and already knew it was coming to him. "Dad, I'll pay you back the moment I get settled. You know I'm good for it." I had believed him. Both times, he told me he'd pay me back, I said to Edmund. My voice came out heavy, pressed down by something I wasn't ready to name. "I know," Edmund said quietly. And he didn't. I pressed the heels of my hands against the table edge and breathed through the tightness sitting in my chest. $30,000 borrowed at interest. 6 years of utilities. $51,000 in forged withdrawals. $36,000 in a forged loan. The number kept climbing, and every time it did, it stripped away another layer of the story I'd been carrying about the kind of family I was part of. "Add it to the file," I said at last. Edmund wrote it down. By the close of the second week, a Thursday evening, the 27th of June, I sat at the kitchen table with the master list spread out before me and drew a red line through the final remaining item, number 50, a streaming subscription. I'd set up 3 years earlier at Garrett's request for a service none of us ever actually used. 50 lines. 50 red marks. I set the pen down and pressed my palm flat against the paper. My hand wasn't shaking. That caught me off guard, honestly. I'd expected something larger to wash over me, a flood of relief or anger or the grim satisfaction of a completed task. What came instead was quieter, more settled, the way you feel when you finish digging a foundation and you stand at the edge of the hole and know precisely what will be built on it. I folded the list in half, then in half again, and tucked it into the breast pocket of my shirt right over the left side of my chest, where it rested alongside the folded photocopy of Vivian's last journal page. "It's done," I told Edmund. He looked up from his reading and studied my face for a moment. "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Like a man who just finished the quiet part," I said, "and is about to find out how loud the rest of it gets." Edmund nodded slowly. "The first billing cycle closes this weekend," he said. "By early next week, the first notices will start going to Cedarwood Lane." I stood, pushed my chair back, and reached for my coffee mug. "Then I'd better get some sleep," I said. "It's going to be an interesting week." These were my accounts, my billing records. 6 years overdue for someone to set them straight, and that someone turned out to be me. Whatever hardship landed on the doorstep of that other house was simply the natural consequence of the truth being delivered where it belonged. Edmund turned up the loan files on that Thursday second week in. On Monday, he'd asked whether he could work through the shoebox, riding in my back seat. Old statements, receipts, miscellaneous paperwork I'd left unsorted because sorting it required sitting with it, and sitting with it required feeling things I hadn't yet found the room for. He arrived at the kitchen table that Thursday evening, holding 2 plain envelopes, placed them in front of me, pressed a finger to the dates penciled on each flap, and said nothing. He was waiting for me to open them. The first was a Cornerstone Savings Bank file, a personal loan, August 2008, $18,000, 8% interest. Purpose in handwriting I recognized as my own tuition and academic fees, Garrett R. Pruitt Fall, semester 2008. I remembered every detail of that phone call. July of that year, Garrett's voice carrying the particular mixture of sheepishness and entitlement he'd been refining since he was 14, financial aid had come up short. He said, and he was counting on me. I was at the bank the following Monday. Dad, I'll pay you back the second I get settled. You know I'm good for it. 4 years of payments later, that loan was retired. Garrett had not contributed a single dollar toward it. The second envelope, a 2013 loan. $12,000 rate a shade higher. Purpose relocation and professional placement fees. G. Pruitt. That was the year Naomi had convinced Garrett his previous position was beneath a man of his caliber, the year he uprooted himself for a fresh start in the city. I was 62 years old when I signed for that $12,000. By the following spring, Naomi had decided the life it purchased wasn't up to her standards either. That's $30,000 total, Edmund said, voice level and measured. Borrowed at interest from your own savings, on his word that he'd make it right. The muscle beneath my cheekbone tightened and twitched. He gave me his word, I said. Twice. I know he did. Edmund laced his fingers together on the tabletop. Now add that $30,000 to the $51,000 from the retirement account, the $36,000 on the forged loan. He nudged the legal pad across so the column of figures faced me. The running total was north of $117,000. That was before 6 years of utility bills and household expenses entered the calculation. I held my eyes on that number. $117,000, accumulated across 23 years of fatherhood. Every time I'd believed him when he said he was in a tight spot, every check written, every form signed, every private reassurance that this was simply what a father does. My eyes burned. I sealed my lips, tipped my head back, and gave the feeling a moment to subside. Then I turned back to Edmund. Put it in the file. It's already there, he said. The second week ended on a Thursday evening, the 27th of June. I sat at that kitchen table, master list, spread flat, and drew the red pen through item number 50, a streaming subscription I'd arranged 3 years back at Garrett's suggestion for something none of us ever sat down to watch. Pen down. Palm on the paper. Fingers perfectly still. That steadiness caught me off guard. I had braced for a wave of something, anger, vindication, the grim release of finishing what you started. Instead, what arrived was low and quiet, more like the calm of a man who has just poured the last of the concrete and knows the foundation is sound. I folded the list once, then again, and slid it into my breast pocket alongside Vivian's journal page. Done, I told Edmund. He raised his eyes from his reading and took a long look at my face. How do you feel? I thought about it before I answered. Like a man who just got through the quiet part, I said. and is standing at the edge of where it gets loud. Edmund gave a single slow nod. Billing cycle closes this weekend, he said. First week of next month, the notices start reaching Cedarwood Lane. I lifted my coffee mug, crossed to the window, and stood looking down at the street. Across town, the lights were on in that house. Someone was probably setting the table. The television was probably on in the background. As far as any of them knew, nothing had changed. They had not yet understood what was moving through the mail toward them. Edmund had recommended I keep a running log, informal, nothing official, just one of those small, wire-bound notebooks you pick up for pocket change at the drugstore, recording the date, what Cody told me, and anything Garrett said on the calls. Every case rests on its documentation, he'd said that first morning. By the third week of July, I had stopped doubting him. The pages filled quickly. July 5th, Cody rang at 7:15 in the evening, talking barely above a whisper, in that way that meant he was tucked under his blankets and didn't want to be overheard. Grandpa Daddy got a whole pile of letters today. Red ones. He stacked them all up on the kitchen counter and then went out to the yard and just stood there for the longest time. How many do you figure? I heard him working through it silently. Maybe 6. All red across the front like the one that came last week. 6 past due notices in one envelope drop. Gas, water, cable contents, insurance, the phone plan, and almost certainly the opening salvo from the furniture financing company that Garrett had taken out 2 years earlier in my name for a living room set priced at $4,000 that I had never once sat on. I got it all down on the page. You holding up okay, buddy? I asked. Yeah. A beat of silence. Daddy was real quiet through dinner. Sometimes that happens, I said. Grown-up business. Nothing you need to carry. July 9th. Second call from Garrett. The measured quality that had been in his voice the first time was gone entirely. What replaced it was something wound too tight, squeezed past the point where it could hold its form. He didn't bother with hello. Dad, things are spiraling, he said. Naomi is fielding collection calls on her personal cell now. Strangers phoning about debts she has no knowledge of. I kept my own voice flat and my free hand open on the desk. Those are creditors reaching out on accounts that have been rerouted to the billing address on record, Garrett. That's standard procedure. Procedure. The word landed in his mouth like something sour. Dad, you're treating this like some kind of transaction. That's exactly what it is, I said. It has been a transaction for 6 years. I was simply the last one to be informed of the terms. He fell silent. I could hear him pulling at the reins on himself, breathing through whatever he wanted to say next. We have to get in a room and work this out. When you're prepared to have an honest conversation, I said, call me back. All cards on the table. He ended the call before I did. I opened the notebook. July 9th, second call. Voice under strain. Referenced collection calls to Naomi's cell. No acknowledgement of the fraud. July 14th. Cody called mid-afternoon. He'd just come back from a short summer session and had a full report ready: his new classroom, his new teacher, and a boy named Cooper who could whistle with 2 fingers. I enjoyed every bit of it. I laughed when it called for laughing. I asked about the things worth asking about. Then toward the tail end of the call, nearly as an aside, he dropped something that stopped my pen cold. Mommy went shopping again today, he said. She came home with these huge bags, way bigger than her usual ones. What sort of bags? I asked, keeping my tone easy. The nice kind. Rope handles, not plastic. She carried them straight to her closet and said I wasn't to go near them. His voice dropped to barely a murmur. She said they're for a special trip. I held my pen above the page. A trip, I said. She say where to? Cody unleashed a long, unguarded 8-year-old yawn. Grandpa, can you let me come see the store sometime? I want to know if you've still got the peanut butter crackers by the register. I'll put a pack aside with your name on it, I said, and I kept every bit of warmth in my voice while something cold and watchful settled into my chest. Ring me whenever you want, okay? Okay. Love you, Grandpa. Love you too, buddy. I set the phone down and read back over what I'd written. Special trip. Bags in the closet? I drew 2 lines beneath it and added a question mark. Naomi did not leave things to chance. She planned with precision, and she disclosed nothing before she was good and ready. Those bags were not going anywhere as a family. Whatever she was organizing it for herself alone. July 21st. Garrett called for the 3rd time. The tightly wound quality in his voice had given way to something that had simply broken open. Dad, the furniture company sent a repossession notice. They're saying if the account isn't brought current by the end of the month, they're coming for the sectional and the dining set. That would be the financing agreement opened in my name in 2021, I said. It's our furniture, Dad. His voice fractured slightly on that last word, and for half a second, I felt the old pull 40 years of reflex, the deep groove worn into me by a lifetime of stepping in before anything could hit the floor. I pressed my palm flat against the desktop and kept it there until the urge receded. That account was opened in my name without my knowledge or consent, Garrett, I said. If you want to hold on to it, you'll need to get the account transferred into your own name and bring it current. The financing company will walk you through how that works. You know, I'm not in a position to do that. My credit, he caught himself. I know, I told him. And I did. Garrett's credit had always been shaky, another gap I had quietly plastered over with my own name across the years, lending my financial standing to situations where his history was too thin or too damaged to carry its own weight. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about this one. I heard something on his end, a fist on a hard surface maybe, and then the line went dead. I shut the notebook and looked across the kitchen table at Edmund. He looked back at me with those unhurried, unreadable eyes that had witnessed more variations of this particular story than I had ever wanted to know were possible. He brought up his credit, I said. I heard Edmund replied. He reached for his coffee. The numbers keep climbing, Leonard. They do, I agreed. And somewhere underneath it, all that cool, watchful feeling that had taken up residence since Cody mentioned the bags in the closet was still quietly there, patient as a man waiting for something to come into focus. I was at the register in Pruitt's Market on a Wednesday morning in the middle of August when my phone buzzed with a text from Clyde Obert. Clyde was someone I'd known peripherally for years. We'd worked the same youth baseball dugout together a decade and a half ago, back when Garrett still showed up to practice without being chased, and Clyde had since built a career at Pinnacle Community Bank as a loan operations manager. We weren't close enough for dinner invitations, but close enough that he'd occasionally send a quiet word when something with my name on it crossed his desk. His text was 4 words. Watch Depot Street today. I read it twice. Then I unknotted my apron, handed it across to Troy, and said I needed an hour. Everything all right, Mr. Pruitt? Troy asked, and the way he said it, genuine, unhurried, caught me for a second. Fine, I said. Just something I need to handle. Depot Street was the main commercial strip through the center of town, 3 blocks of storefronts and professional offices. The kind of corridor where the parking spots vanished before 8 in the morning and people in suits walked to lunch. Garrett's firm took up the 2nd floor of a building near the East End, above a dry cleaner and a title company. His black SUV, the one I had co-signed a loan on 3 years ago, because his credit history on its own wouldn't qualify, was usually sitting in the reserved spots right out front. I found a space half a block up and crossed on foot, keeping to the opposite sidewalk. I didn't have a clear picture of what I'd come to see. I only knew that Clyde Obert didn't send 4-word texts without a reason. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:47 in the morning, a flatbed tow truck bearing Pinnacle Community Bank's repossession contractor decal on its door rolled onto Depot Street from the north and made its way toward the reserved spaces. The driver moved with the unhurried ease of a professional, the specific nonchalance of someone who has done this job enough times to understand that looking routine is part of doing it right. He pulled up next to the black SUV, stepped out, checked the plate against something on his tablet, gave a small nod, and proceeded to hook up the vehicle with the quiet efficiency of a man who had every legal authority to be doing exactly what he was doing. I watched from the other side of the street, one hand in my jacket pocket, the other wrapped around a coffee cup I'd bought from the corner cart. My chest felt strange. Not tight, not triumphant, hollow in a specific way, like a room stripped bare of its furniture, where you can suddenly take the measure of how much space was really there all along. Garrett came through the building's front door at 9:53. Navy suit, the good one, client meeting quality briefcase in one hand, phone pressed to his ear. He was halfway to the curb before his eyes found the flatbed, and his mind caught up to what his eyes were showing him. The SUV rising off the ground in a slow mechanical arc. Hey! The word left him like something involuntary, sharp and carrying. Hey, stop, that's my car! The repo driver had been on the receiving end of that exact sentence more times than he'd bothered to tally. He kept working, deliberate, unhurried. I said stop! Garrett dropped his briefcase on the sidewalk and seized the driver's arm, and my stomach clenched, because if he didn't let go, what was already bad was about to become substantially worse. The driver spoke to him low and level and held out the paperwork. Garrett read it. His grip released. His phone was still at his ear, but whatever conversation had been happening was over. He stood on the sidewalk with the morning light on his suit and his briefcase on the concrete at his feet, and he watched his car loaded onto that flatbed with the look of a man who has just felt the ground shift beneath him and hasn't yet processed the fact that he is falling. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself, standing on a porch in June with a cardboard box under my arm. People had slowed to look. 2 women in front of the coffee shop next door. A man in shirt sleeves who'd come out of one of the offices. I could see figures at the second-floor windows of Garrett's building colleagues watching from behind the glass. The flatbed pulled out and drove away. Garrett remained on the sidewalk for a long moment. Then very slowly, he bent down and retrieved his briefcase. The slowness of it, the visible cost of doing something as ordinary as picking up a bag, was the image that stayed with me as I turned and made my way back to my car. I sat behind the wheel with both hands on it and stared at my knuckles. I had imagined that when this moment arrived, it would feel clean, definitive. The satisfying weight of justice landing squarely. What it actually felt like was older than that and harder to name. The particular grief of a father who watches his child arrive at consequences that were always coming, that he could see from years away, and that he could have kept postponing indefinitely by continuing to put himself in between. I hadn't felt it when I filed the paperwork to redirect the accounts. Not when I submitted the FTC report, not when I froze my credit. But watching Garrett reach down for that briefcase on the pavement, I felt it. It hurt in a way I hadn't braced for. I drove back to the store, tied my apron back on, worked through the rest of the morning without saying a word to Troy about what I'd witnessed. That evening, Garrett's name lit up my phone 7 times between 5:00 and 8:00. I sat at the small desk in room 3C. Third door on the left. I watched his name appear and fade 7 times over while I wrote in my notebook and let the calls stack up in voicemail. I wasn't ready to speak with him. Not out of anger. because I was still sorting out the distance between what was right and what was easy, and I needed that gap to be resolved somewhere in my chest before I said a word. Edmund knocked at 8:30. "He called you too," he said from the doorway. "Said he needed to speak with you. Said it was urgent." "It is urgent," I replied. "Just not in the way he believes." Edmund studied me for a moment. "You were there when it happened." "I was there." He gave a slow nod. "How were you holding up, Leonard?" I looked down at the notebook pages of Cody's quiet reports, Garrett's increasingly desperate calls, the slow unraveling of a household that had been built on another man's name. He came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after the repossession. I caught sight of him on the security monitors before he ever touched the door. Shoulders hunched, no tie jacket creased like he'd been sleeping in it, and no vehicle out front because the bank had claimed that too. Garrett Pruitt, arriving on foot at his father's grocery store with the unsteady bearing of a man who had spent the past 72 hours discovering what it feels like when the foundation beneath you stops holding. I stayed at the monitor a moment, watching from the back office. My chest did something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite nothing, a particular tightening I didn't have a clean word for. Then I took the envelope from the top drawer of my desk, the one I'd prepared 3 days earlier because I had known with complete certainty this visit was coming, and I went out to meet him. Dad. The words split apart in his mouth. His eyes were red at the rims, not from weeping, but from the specific hollow depletion of sleepless nights, stacked one on top of another. Standing close, he looked 5 years older than he had in June. The skin along his jaw had gone slack, and the expensive suit that once seemed like a second skin now just looked like something he was wearing. "Can we talk somewhere private, stockroom?" I said, and turned without waiting for an answer. He followed. The stockroom smelled of cardboard canned tomatoes and the dry warmth of a space that never got enough circulation. I pulled the door to behind us. Against the far wall stood the small wooden table where I ate lunch alone when I needed a quiet 20 minutes, and I took one side of it. I set the envelope down between us. Garrett dropped into the chair across from me and buried his face in both hands, grinding the heels of his palms against his eyes. When he lowered them, his face was blotched and raw, the way a face looks when it has been holding something at bay for weeks, and the effort has finally become visible. "Dad, I don't even know where to begin." His voice was low, fraying at the seams. "The car is gone. My manager pulled me in this morning and said my performance is slipping. Said I seem distracted. Naomi and I haven't had a real conversation in 2 weeks." He pressed a fist briefly to his mouth, jaw working. "Everything is unraveling at the same time, and I can't find anything to grab onto." I looked at my son across that table. I thought about the boy who used to doze off against my shoulder on long car trips and wake up pretending he'd been awake the whole time. I thought about the 12-year-old who cried when his dog died and made me swear not to tell a soul. I thought about how much I had loved him, still loved him, the way you love something that has cost you more than you can tally, and you love it regardless because you were present at the very beginning, and you cannot unfeel that. Then I pushed the envelope across the table. "Open it," I said. He looked at it as though he'd only just registered it was there. He picked it up, his hands had a faint tremor, worked the flap open, and drew out the 3 pages inside. The first was the bank statement, 8 months of transaction history from my retirement savings account. Every withdrawal marked in yellow, the amounts and dates annotated in Edmund's careful handwriting. The branch locations circled. $51,400 taken out in 6 installments while I was making breakfast in that house, paying the electric bill, watching Cody learn to read. The second page was the master list. 50 accounts. Provider names, account numbers, years, opened, outstanding balances, my name heading every single entry. 6 years of my identity serving as the financial backbone of a household, that had shown me the door with one box of belongings. The third page was the Meridian loan document, Garrett's name as primary borrower, and on the co-signer line my name in handwriting that resembled mine, but was not mine, with a sticky note in Edmund's hand fixed to the corner. Not his signature. Letter form angle and loop pattern inconsistent with authenticated samples. See comparison attached. The color left Garrett's face so completely and so fast that I had a reflexive urge to ask whether he needed water. His hands tightened on the pages until the paper buckled under his grip. His mouth opened. A sound began and didn't find its way out. His eyes traveled from the first page to the second to the third and back again, and with each pass, the emptiness left by the color was filled by something worse. A slow, spreading recognition with nowhere left to retreat. Dad. His voice was scraped to almost nothing. I can explain. You've said that before, I told him. My voice came out quieter than I'd intended. Not cold, not sharp, just settled in a way that surprised even me. You said it when I asked about the retirement statements 3 years ago. You said it about the Meridian account. Garrett, you've been explaining things to me for 20 years, and the explanations have always been just convincing enough that I let the matter drop. Because I wanted to let it drop. Because letting it drop was easier than accepting what it meant. It wasn't supposed to go this far. He choked on the words, throat visibly working, jaw clenched, until the muscle twitched in his cheek. A tear broke free and ran down the side of his face, and he caught it with the back of his hand in a furious swipe, as though his own eyes had betrayed him. Naomi said you'd never look closely enough. She said you trusted us too much to check. The pain that moved through me at that was sharp and specific. Not anger, something quieter and deeper than anger. She was right, I said. I trusted you. Both of you. For years and years and years, I trusted you. Dad, please. His voice cracked wide open, raw, desperate, sounding younger than it had any right to. Please. I know how this looks. I know what those papers say. But I am still your son. That can't stop meaning something. I held my eyes on him for a long moment. My throat ached. My eyes burned. 68 years old, sitting across a stockroom table from my boy, who had helped take $117,000 from me, and I still felt it. The pull of him. The fact of him. The irreducible weight of having loved this person since before he had a name. It still means something, I said, and I meant every word of it. That's the only reason when we're having this conversation instead of one with a prosecutor. I stood up. Garrett's head snapped up, eyes wide. Something close to panic sweeping across his face. Dad, don't go, please. Those documents are yours to keep, I said. Read every page. And when you're ready to talk about all of it, not pieces of it, every part of it, you call me. I picked up my pen from the table. We're done for today, Garrett. I walked back out onto the floor. Behind me, I heard him make a sound, low fractured, the sound of something giving way, and I felt it travel the length of my spine and lodge between my shoulder blades like something dense and cold. I kept walking. A customer was waiting at register 2 with a full cart. I greeted her by name because she came in every Thursday, smiled, and began scanning her items one by one. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. Everything anyone could see was steady, but underneath all of that, in the place where no one had access, I was holding myself together with both hands and praying it would hold until the doors locked at closing. I thought about Naomi and the bags in the closet that Cody had mentioned. The special trip. I thought about how lost Garrett had looked just now, genuinely lost, not performing it, and I found myself wondering whether she had told him what she was planning. Something in the hollowness behind his eyes told me she hadn't, and something in the way he'd said, "Naomi said you trusted us too much to check," told me that whatever came next, he was going to discover the truth about those bags, the same way I had learned everything else, too late and all at once. 3 days after Garrett walked out of my stockroom, carrying those 3 pages, Cody called me at 6:45 in the morning, earlier than usual. Cody was a reliable 7:30 caller after breakfast before the school bus. A 6:45 call meant something had pulled him out of bed before the house was fully stirring, which meant he was calling from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, which meant whatever was sitting on his 8-year-old chest was heavy enough that 45 more minutes was more than he could manage. I picked up on the first ring. "Hey, buddy, you're up early?" Grandpa. Barely a whisper, tight and hushed. "Are Mommy and Daddy going to be okay?" My grip on the phone went firm. My eyes shut for just a moment. Not long, only long enough to let the specific ache of that question move through me. 8 years old, carrying this before sunrise. "What makes you ask that, bud?" I kept my voice soft and measured, the way you handle something that might give way under too much pressure. "They had another fight last night," he said. "A bad one. I could hear them from my room. Daddy was really loud. Mommy kept talking quiet, and somehow that was worse than when she's the loud one." He paused. "And then this morning, Daddy was asleep on the couch. I saw him when I got up for water. Garrett was sleeping on the couch. The man who had poured champagne in that living room 2 months ago was now bunking in it. Sometimes grown-ups go through hard patches, and they need a little distance from each other." I told Cody, choosing my words, the way you pick a rote through something that might not hold your weight. "It doesn't mean they don't love each other. And it doesn't mean you did anything to cause it." "I know I didn't do anything." He said it with the flat certainty of a child who had already turned that possibility over and set it aside. "I just want them to stop being sad. Everything feels different now." "I know it does." My throat went tight around the words. "I know, buddy." "Grandpa." His voice dropped lower. "Mommy has been moving stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "Her jewelry box. And the good coats from the front hall closet. And some boxes from the garage. She's been loading them into her car." He stopped to think it through. "Over the last few days, when Daddy isn't home, she told me she's just reorganizing, but she never brings anything back inside." The cold watchfulness that had first settled in when Cody mentioned the bags came back now with more weight behind it. Naomi was methodically pulling assets out of that house. Not reorganizing, repositioning. The distinction mattered considerably. "The big bags are still in her closet," Cody added. "The ones with the rope handles. She put another one in there." "All right," I said, keeping my voice easy while my thoughts moved fast and sharp. "You've got a good eye, bud. That's a real useful quality to have, Grandpa." He hesitated. "Will I still get to see you, even if things change?" My heart contracted so hard, I pressed my free hand flat against my chest. "You will always get to see me," I told him, and I put the full weight of that into my voice, everything I had, nothing withheld. "That is one thing that is not going to change. Not ever. You hear me? Never, okay?" The relief that moved through his voice was soft and small, and it broke something clean and quiet inside me. "Okay, Grandpa." "Go eat your breakfast," I said. "Call me after school." After the call ended, I sat at the small desk in room 3C for a long while, with my hand still pressed over my heart, feeling my own pulse. Naomi was moving jewelry, good coats boxes from the garage. This wasn't preparation for a family trip. She was constructing a separate life piece by careful piece right under Garrett's roof, while Garrett was asleep on the sofa and had no idea. Edmund knocked and let himself in at 8, Monroe, coffee in hand. his way of signaling he had something to report. "Claudette Fenwick called me last night," he said, settling into the chair by the window. Claudette, as Edmund explained, was a retired schoolteacher who had lived next door to the Cedarwood Lane house for 11 years. She had known the block long before Garrett and Naomi arrived, and she had known Leonard well enough from when he still lived there to exchange a wave from the driveway and occasionally find zucchini from her garden left on the porch. "She's been keeping an eye on things over there," Edmund said. "Multiple service trucks this past week, collections. She figures based on the markings on the vehicles, and the neighbors in the cul-de-sac have started talking." Talking how I asked. "The way people in comfortable neighborhoods talk when one household starts to look like it's coming apart," Edmund said, his voice measured. "First it's concern, then it turns to distance." Claudette said 2 families that used to share dinners with Garrett and Naomi have quietly stopped returning calls. He turned his coffee mug between his hands. "She asked after you," Leonard said, and I'm quoting her directly. "I always knew something wasn't right over there. I should have said something to Leonard years ago. People see what they're ready to see," I said, and there was no bitterness in it, just the plain fact. I hadn't been ready to see it for 6 years. I couldn't fault Claudette for the same. "There's something else," Edmund said. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "I've been in contact with a colleague at the county recorder's office regarding the deed situation. I'm not in a position to say anything definitive yet, but, Leonard, I need you to give me a few more days on that front." "I've been patient this long," I said. "I know you have." He held my gaze. "The truth has a way of surfacing through children, Leonard. Cody telling you about those bags that carries weight. That's the kind of detail that has legal significance depending on what she's actually planning." I thought about Cody's voice at 6:45 in the morning, quiet and careful, reporting on his mother's movements, with the grave precision of someone who understood, even without having words for it, that what he was saying mattered. He asked me whether his parents were going to be okay. I told Edmund, my voice coming out rougher than I meant it to. Something shifted in Edmund's expression. A gentleness moved into it, the kind that belongs to a man who has witnessed a great many hard things and hasn't let the witnessing hollow him out. "What did you tell him?" "I told him some things I couldn't promise," I said honestly. "And one thing I could." Edmund nodded slowly. He turned to look out the window at the morning street below. "Whatever is in that closet," he said quietly, "I don't think it stays there much longer." He was right about that. But neither of us yet knew what was about to come through my store door first. She arrived on a Saturday morning, and I don't believe the timing was accidental. Saturdays were the busiest day at Pruitt's Market lot, full by 8:30, every register running the produce section, picked clean by 10. Naomi had always understood that an audience was its own kind of leverage, and she had always known precisely how to deploy one. I was at the customer service counter near the front when she came through the automatic doors. She was dressed the way she dressed when she meant to project authority, heels on a grocery store floor, an ivory blazer over a silk blouse, hair pulled back hard. But her eyes gave her away the moment I saw them. Bright and glassy in the way that means tears before she got out of the car turned into something more useful on the walk across the parking lot. Something like fury. She came straight for me without a glance at anything else in the store. Saturday morning shoppers stepped aside as she passed the way. People instinctively clear a path for something moving with that kind of momentum. "Leonard." Her voice was pitched loud enough that the woman choosing apples 5 feet away looked up from her cart. "We need to talk. Right now." "Good morning, Naomi," I said, and kept my voice at the same register I used for everything in this store, unhurried, level, the voice of a man with no particular reason to rush. "What can I help you with?" "You can help me by explaining." She stopped, pulled herself together, started again, her voice rising. You are deliberately destroying this family. You know that. You have been systematically cutting off every account, every service, every— Naomi. I said her name once quietly. This is my store. There are families shopping here. I don't care about your store. Her voice broke on the final word, and her composure broke with it, the composed surface giving way all at once. Her face flushed deep and uneven. You think this is some kind of game? The furniture is gone. The phone plan is suspended. Garrett can't. Her voice tore into something raw. You are his father. You are supposed to love your family. I looked at her without moving. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I do love my family, I said. I loved them for 68 years. That's the whole problem. What's coming next stopped me cold the first time I understood the full weight of it. An 8-year-old boy, a phone call before sunrise, and a question no child should have to carry. Before we get there, if someone you loved had been quietly working against you for years, would you want to know all of it at once or piece by piece? My composure, it turned out, infuriated her far more than any raised voice could have. Her fingers curled tight at her sides. Without another word from me, she wheeled toward the nearest display, a wire rack of canned soups standing beside the service counter, and shoved it hard. The whole thing went sideways in slow motion, then hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot, cans scattering across the linoleum in every direction. The store held its breath. Every conversation died. Every cartwheel stopped mid-spin. Heads swiveled. Troy came striding out from the back, in maybe 4 seconds, face set. A pair of my other employees emerged behind him, drawn by that instinct people have when they can't identify the trouble but know trouble is present. Naomi stood there, panting, her chest rising and falling, mascara cutting dark lines down one cheek. The finger she aimed at me was trembling. You want to play games with paperwork and accounts? Fine. But you remember, you are the one who started this. You walked away from your family, Naomi. I kept my voice low, but in that silence it reached every corner of the room. I held her gaze a beat, then deliberately lifted my eyes toward the corner above the service counter where the security camera sat with its red light pulsing. There are children in this store, and there are cameras. She tracked my look to the camera. Something locked up in her posture, and then for just a fraction of a second, I watched it happen. Understanding moved across her face. She was doing the math, taking in the room, registering at last, and fully, that a dozen phones had been trained on her from the instant the rack went down. Whatever heat had been driving her drained away almost visibly, leaving behind something colder, something calculated. Both hands came up to smooth the front of her blazer. Her chin lifted. She pivoted toward the exit and covered the distance in the slow, measured strides of a person who knows she is still being filmed and intends to look like she chose to leave. The automatic doors closed behind her. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Troy exhaled long and slow and bent down to start retrieving cans, and with that, the store shook itself back to life. Voices picked up. Cartwheels rolled again. From the cereal aisle, a small voice asked his mother to explain what that had been about. "You doing all right, Mr. Pruitt?" Troy called up to me from the floor, a can of tomato soup in each hand. "I'm fine," I said. Which was true in the particular way it is true when the thing you have spent months dreading finally shows up, and you discover you are still standing. I lowered myself down and began collecting cans beside him. "Come on, let's sort this out." Troy found me around noon and said quietly that the video had been shared 400 times on the community Facebook page. By 2:00, the count had climbed past 600. 3 calls came in from numbers I knew: neighbors, longtime customers, people who had drifted out of my life over the past year or two, and every one of them amounted to the same message. We saw what happened. We're sorry we didn't say something sooner. Claudette Fenwick called at 3:15, her voice carrying both warmth and conviction. Leonard, I always knew something wasn't right in that house. You should have heard from me years ago. I'm sorry I waited. You don't owe me an apology, Claudette. I said it, and meant every word. People only see what they've already allowed themselves to believe. I was settling up the register at 4:00 when a text from Edmund lit up my phone. 4 words, come to my office. No question mark, no qualifier, and that flatness told me plainly that what he had uncovered was not a small thing. Edmund's office sat on the ground floor of the Ridgecrest boarding house and was furnished with the economy of a man who had nothing to prove. A desk, 2 chairs, 1 filing cabinet, and shelves running floor to ceiling packed with legal references that went well beyond what a retired man technically required. That excess of books told you something essential about him. When I got there at 4:30 that Saturday afternoon, a manila folder lay open on his desk. A yellow legal pad alongside it, every line filled with his cramped, careful script. Sit down, he said, eyes still on the page. And close the door. I did both. The room had a particular quality of stillness in the set of Edmund's shoulders. In the unhurried way he handled each paper, that told me this was not a conversation to rush into. It was the way you step toward something that is both breakable and consequential. I reached out to a contact at the county recorder's office. Edmund said, laying down his pen and lacing his fingers on the desk. I had her pull every recorded document tied to the Cedarwood Lane property deed transfers, specifically anything from 2017 through today. And, I said, my hands were flat on my knees still enough, but something in my chest had shifted. And no recorded deed exists transferring title from you to Garrett. He delivered it without any theatrical pause, the way a physician reads a result they already anticipated. The 2017 purchase agreement is on file, the contract from when you originally bought the place. Your name appears on it as the buyer. But that agreement and a deed are 2 separate instruments, Leonard. A deed is the legal mechanism by which ownership actually passes from one party to another. For that transfer to carry any force in this state, the deed must be signed, witnessed by a licensed notary, and filed at the county recorder's office. Filing is what puts it on record and gives it legal weight. I shifted forward in my chair. So none of that was done. None of that was done, Edmund said. His best assessment when Garrett and Naomi moved into the house, the deed transfer was either left unfinished or drawn up incorrectly and never submitted for recording. It happens more often than people realize, especially within families where trust gets treated as a stand-in for paperwork. He let that sit a moment. It isn't. Good intentions have no standing in property law, only a recorded instrument does. I needed a few seconds with that. I turned it over carefully in my head, the way you feel your way through a darkened room knowing the floor isn't clear, not wanting to stumble over anything you can't see. So what you're saying, I told him slowly, is that on paper, legally, by the official record, that house is still mine. As of the search my contact ran yesterday morning, yes. Edmund looked straight at me. Leonard Pruitt remains the title holder of record for the Cedarwood Lane property. Garrett holds no recorded ownership stake in it at all. Something tightened in my chest that I couldn't easily label. Triumph didn't fit. It sat too heavy for that. Relief wasn't quite it either, too many complications tangled inside it. It was closer to realizing that a door you had believed was bolted shut had never actually been locked. That for 6 years you could have walked back through it, if only someone had told you it was open. How did nobody catch this earlier, I asked, and I could hear the frayed edge in my voice. Because nobody went looking, Edmund said, and his tone was gentle about it. You had been paying the property taxes, the account still carried your name, and utilities were running. There was nothing to flag a problem. Discrepancies like this only come to light when someone specifically digs for them. He pressed a finger to the folder. I dug. I put the heel of my hand to my forehead and worked to breathe steadily. So where does that leave me? That question, Edmund said. Measuring each word has no answer but yours. You could sit on the information entirely. You could put it on the table as negotiating weight, a path toward some kind of settlement. Or you could pursue it through formal legal channels, assert your ownership on the record, at which point Garrett and Naomi would be living in your house without any legal right to be there. They'd have to go, I said. They would have to go, he agreed. Through a court-ordered process with proper notice given. Not overnight. Due process doesn't disappear just because the title is clear. But yes, they would have to leave, and there would be precious little for them to contest, since no deed bearing Garrett's name exists to argue over. I pushed back my chair and crossed to the window. The evening was easing in, outside streetlights coming on one by one, a couple moving along the sidewalk with a dog. The ordinary Saturday rhythm of a neighborhood that had no knowledge of and no interest in what was being said in this room. I thought about Vivian, who had spent 3 years cooking in the kitchen of that house before she died, never once suspecting the title had never changed hands. I thought about Cody asleep somewhere in that house in a bedroom that the record said belonged to his grandfather. I'm not ready to make that move yet, I said. The words came out hoarse, but I was sure of them. Not until I've exhausted everything else. I understand, Edmund said. He closed the folder and extended it across the desk toward me. But I want you to have a copy of everything my colleague found. So it's in your hands. So you know what you're holding. I took the folder. 20 pages, maybe not heavy by any measure, but what those pages represented settled across my chest and shoulders like a burden I had been carrying for years without ever knowing it had weight. I drove back to the Ridgecrest boarding house that night, with the folder riding on the passenger seat beside me. The town was quiet, streets nearly empty. One thing Edmund had said kept turning over in my mind. These gaps only surface when someone goes looking. 6 years I had spent not looking, trusting, absorbing it all, telling myself that love didn't require documentation. I understood now what love without documentation actually costs. The figure was north of $117,000, and one house that was somehow still legally mine. Then Garrett did something I hadn't seen coming, something that forced my hand and pushed my timeline forward before I was anywhere near ready. He called on a Monday morning and asked if he could bring Cody by to see me. He packaged it the way he'd always packaged requests that had already been decided, less a genuine question than a notification dressed in the clothing of one. Cody misses you, Dad. I think it would do him good to see you. I said yes without any hesitation. Not for Garrett. For Cody. We met at Sycamore Green Park, 2 blocks from the store, a small neighborhood park with a fountain that hadn't worked in 2 years and 3 wooden benches arranged along a gravel path. The sort of place where the neighborhood slows to a gentle stop on weekend mornings. Garrett arrived in a rental car I didn't recognize, stepping out looking like a man who had been losing air slowly for weeks. The suit was nowhere. He had on jeans and an untucked shirt, and whatever confidence had once lived in the set of his shoulders, that easy certainty of a man who expected the world to keep making room for him, had simply left. Cody launched out of the back seat before the car stopped moving. He came across the gravel at a full sprint, his sneakers hammering the path arms already open wide. He hit me hard enough that I had to plant my back foot to stay upright. I wrapped both arms around him and held on his small frame solid and warm against me. His face went into my jacket, and my eyes burned so fast and so fiercely that I had to press my lips together and breathe through my nose until it passed enough to speak. "Hey, buddy." The words came out low and rough. "I missed you something terrible. I missed you more." He said it into my jacket, muffled and certain, the way children announce truths they've never thought to doubt. Garrett settled onto a bench across the path and sat with his elbows on his knees, studying the gravel. I walked Cody over to the edge of the dry fountain, and we sat while he filled me in on every significant event of the past several weeks. The fractions test, the book report about the dog that walked home across 3 states, and the deeply confusing situation involving a boy named Cooper who could whistle with 2 fingers. I gave every word my full attention, because every word was real and clean and entirely his own. I needed that more than I could have explained. After a while, the conversation reached a natural pause. Cody swung his feet against the fountain base and cut a sideways glance at me with those clear, serious eyes that had always reminded me of Vivian. "Grandpa, Mommy asked me to ask you something." My chest tightened, slow and certain, like a door being drawn closed. I kept my face easy and open. "What did she ask?" "You know, she said to ask if you miss us." There was a careful quality in his voice, the sound of someone reciting rehearsed words, precise and slightly formal, not quite his natural rhythm. "She said if you miss us and you want things to go back to normal, then maybe you'd want to help fix the house stuff. And if you help, she said she'll stop being so mad." I looked at my grandson's face, 8 years old, clear eyes, honest face, completely unaware that he was serving as a negotiating intermediary for his mother. He had been handed a script he had no idea was a script, and he was delivering it faithfully because he loved his grandfather and trusted his mother, and hadn't yet acquired the framework for seeing when the adults around him use children to carry the weight of what they're too afraid to carry themselves. The grief that moved through me in that moment was the sharpest I had felt since the night I read Vivian's diary. "Did Mommy tell you to say exactly those words, buddy?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. He nodded, not troubled by the question in the slightest. "She practiced with me at breakfast. She said it was important to say it right, a beat. She also said if you don't want to help, she has to go on a long trip, and that she already has her bags packed. She said it like it was my fault if she has to go." Something cold moved through me with quiet precision. "The big bags?" I asked. "The ones with the rope handles." His eyes went a little wide, surprised I knew. "Yeah. They're not in the closet anymore. She moved them by the bedroom door. Both of them. And a third one I hadn't seen before." He frowned, working through it. "She said the trip would be for a long time. I don't know where. She wouldn't tell me. 3 bags by the bedroom door. Not in the closet. Set out and waiting for the right moment to go." This had moved past preparation. This was an exit staged and ready. "Cody," I said, keeping my voice gentle and level, making certain nothing in my face gave him cause to worry. "You didn't do anything wrong by telling me this. None of this is on you." "I know," he said. Then his voice went smaller. "Grandpa, do you think if you help them, Mommy won't have to go? I don't want her to go for a long time. Even when she's really mad at Daddy, she still puts the good granola bars in my lunch." My throat clamped down so hard I had to look away, out at the path, the dry fountain, the quiet Tuesday morning park, and breathe until the feeling became something I could contain without letting it show. This child. This good, open-hearted, entirely innocent child, worrying about his granola bars, while the adults around him set fire to everything in reach. "You're going to be okay, Cody," I told him, and I put everything I had behind those words. "Whatever the grown-ups work out between them, you are going to be just fine. I promise you that." He leaned into my arm for a moment, the way children lean into people they have decided to trust. Then Garrett stood up from his bench and started across the path. I stood too. I walked Cody the few steps back toward his father. Garrett looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not the usual deflection or calculation, but something raw and stripped bare, the look of a man standing in a room after everything has been cleared out of it, suddenly aware of how much space there is and how empty it's become. I held his gaze only long enough to say 3 words. "She's already leaving." The color fell out of Garrett's face like a slow tide going out. His jaw loosened. I watched the knowledge arrive in his eyes, not the suspicion he must have already been living with, but the full settled certainty of it hitting the floor at last. I turned and walked back toward the store. That evening I called Edmund and said simply, "Tomorrow morning, I'm ready." Edmund had told me, that very first morning in his kitchen, that the most powerful move available to me wasn't legal in nature. It was standing in the open. I hadn't grasped what he meant until that Thursday morning in early October when I turned into Pruitt's Market at 6:45 and found a local news van already parked across the street. The camera operator was setting up on the sidewalk, and a reporter in a blue jacket was reviewing her notes on a clipboard. Edmund stood at the store's front door in his good coat, beside a younger man I had met on only 2 prior occasions. Noel Stanton, a practicing attorney, who had worked alongside Edmund on elder protection cases for the past decade. Noel was holding a briefcase and carried the focused stillness of a man who had prepared carefully and was content to be exactly as quiet as the moment called for. "Ready?" Edmund asked when I stepped out of my Oldsmobile. "Getting there," I said. I went inside, unlocked the register, switched on the lights, and pulled on my apron. The green one, the one with Pruitt's Market stitched in white across the front. The one Vivian had given me for my 55th birthday. I tied it at the back, the way I had tied it 10,000 times before. Then I walked back out through the front door and crossed the sidewalk to where the camera was waiting. Yvonne Pickett was her name. Channel 4's local affiliate reporter, someone Edmund had reached through a contact at the county press office. She put out her hand as I walked up. "Mr. Pruitt, thank you for agreeing to this." "Thank you for being here," I told her. My voice came out even. My palms were dry. 6 hours of sleep the night before, more than I'd thought I'd manage. Yvonne set me up with the storefront at my back. My name across the top of the door, the green awning, the hand-painted signs in the produce window. She gave her camera operator a nod, then faced me again. "Whenever you're ready," she said. From my apron pocket, I drew the folded sheet of paper. Edmund and I had worked on it Wednesday night at his kitchen table, a pot of tea going between us, combing through each word until nothing remained that wasn't exactly what I intended. I smoothed it open. I faced the lens and read. "My name is Leonard Pruitt. I am 68 years old. I built Pruitt's Market from nothing in this town 33 years ago. I am also the legal title holder of record for a residential property on Cedarwood Lane, which I purchased in 2017, and which has been occupied by my son and his wife for the past 6 years." A breath, a pause. In the course of those 6 years, more than $100,000 was removed from my accounts by way of unauthorized withdrawals and forged documentation. 50 separate accounts carrying my name. Utilities insurance financing agreements that were never transferred to the people living there who were responsible for them. I am filing today a civil suit for elder financial fraud, backed by documentation of every transaction, every forged signature, and every account involved. My attorney Noel Stanton will speak to the legal specifics. I pressed the paper closed and met the camera squarely. I am also saying publicly that my relationship with my son, Garrett Pruitt, is severed. Not from hatred, from necessity, and from the conviction that truth, when it is this thoroughly documented, belongs in the open air rather than settled quietly behind closed doors. Something passed through my chest on those last words, heavy and slow, the dull ache of an old injury waking up in the cold. I held still. Let it move through me and find its place. Yvonne stepped closer. Mr. Pruitt, can you speak to the role your daughter-in-law, Naomi Pruitt, played in what you've described? My attorney will address that, I said. Noel Stanton came forward, briefcase in hand, and spoke to the camera with the composed, methodical steadiness of a man who had stood in front of one before and knew the weight each word would carry once it was on the record. He laid out the charges, the evidentiary trail, the arc of the fraud investigation. He named the FTC report. He walked through the forged withdrawal slips, the Meridian loan, the county deed records. He spoke for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, I know, because I counted. When he was done, he stepped aside, and the camera swung back to me. Is there anything you'd like to add? Yvonne asked. Vivian's journal crossed my mind. Cody at the dry fountain, telling me in his matter-of-fact way that his mother still slipped the good granola bars into his lunch. 6 years' worth of Sunday breakfasts eaten in a house where my name sat on the deed, and I had been made to feel like a stranger who'd stayed past his time. No, I said. The documents cover what needs to be said. I shook Yvonne's hand. I shook Noel's. I put a hand on Edmund's shoulder, and he rested his own over it, briefly, the kind of thing men do when language would only get in the way, and then I turned and went back inside. The apron came off. I hung it on its hook behind the register, same as always. Then I made my way to the produce section and started going through the morning's strawberries, pressing each container to feel for soft spots, pulling out the ones that wouldn't last the day. Troy was at my side 10 minutes later, quiet as a shadow. The van's still parked out front, he said. Folks are stopping on the sidewalk. Good, I said, picking up the next container. Put these strawberries on special and get a sign in the window. The segment ran at 6:00 that evening. By 6:15, Edmund texted to say it had spread across 4 community pages and 2 neighborhood apps. By 7:00, Noel Stanton had taken a call from a lawyer representing Naomi Pruitt, asking about the charges. Before 7:30, that same lawyer had put in a petition for emergency divorce proceedings on Naomi's behalf. The night I had spent 4 months working toward had finally come. And somewhere on the other side of town, the woman who had lifted a champagne glass over my leaving was now scrambling to put as much daylight as she could between herself and what was bearing down. The reckoning after the press conference didn't arrive the way an explosion does. Walls don't fall the way movies pretend, one grand crash, debris, then quiet. They give way the way Garrett and Naomi's life gave way, level by level, piece by piece, each layer collapsing only after the one below it had already failed. Until you wake up one morning and where something stood there is only open ground. Edmund reached me the morning after the broadcast voice, careful, and measured the particular register he used when he'd had time to sit with difficult news and figure out how to carry it across. Naomi's attorney put in emergency divorce papers last night, he said. The petition names Garrett as the sole decision-maker for every financial matter during the marriage. She's painting herself as someone who was misled by him. My hand went flat on the kitchen table. She wants to get out from under the fraud charges. That's what this is. It won't stick entirely. Noel has paperwork with her signature on the forged withdrawal authorizations, but it'll gum up the works, and it puts Garrett in a far worse position while things sort themselves out. He let a beat go by. There's more. Cody is being sent to stay with Naomi's mother in Louisville, Kentucky. Naomi set it up before the divorce papers were even filed. That one landed below the ribs, hard and exact. Cody packed off to another city while the grown-ups reduced everything to ash. Is he all right? I asked, and my voice came out ragged in a way I hadn't intended. Claudette said he walked to the car with his backpack, and his stuffed dog Edmund told me, his voice softening in the way it did when something called for gentleness. He looked puzzled, more than scared. Kids find their way through, Leonard. I know that, I said. It's just a hard thing to watch him have to do. Everything else gave way in the weeks that came after on its own timetable, not one piece of it considerate of whether I was ready. Naomi cleared out of Cedarwood Lane in the second week of October. The bags from beside the bedroom door, the jewelry box, the good coats, the boxes out of the garage gone while Garrett was still showing up to what was left of his job, gripping the last filament of ordinary life with both hands. She left 2 sentences on the kitchen counter. That was all. Claudette found him on the front porch steps that evening, no coat, the note still in his grip, watching the street with the vacant look of a man who just learned the floor beneath him was never solid. Garrett's job ended officially in the 3rd week of October. His manager, the same one who'd called him in after the car was repossessed, said the company had no way to function under a continuing spotlight of public scrutiny. He took a room at a weekly motel on Highway 70, the sort of place where the vending machine stands in for amenities and the television is chained to the wall. Noel Stanton told me Garrett rang the office 3 separate times during that stretch, wording the same question differently each time he asked. Was there any road through this that ended somewhere other than where it seemed to be heading? Noel gave him the same answer every time, that depended entirely on what Garrett chose to do next. On a Tuesday in early November, the sky still dark at 5 Zorzarum, I pulled up to Pruitt's Market and found my son on the concrete step at the front door. Flannel shirt, thin undershirt, 38-degree weather. Knees drawn up, arms locked around himself the way a body holds itself when it has given up expecting anything warmer. When he raised his head and saw me there, keys in hand, his face was the face of a man who had been sitting in the dark alone for weeks and used up every last reserve of whatever keeps a person believing that morning is worth waiting for. I knew that face. I had worn it on a porch in June, a cardboard box beside me. I didn't ask what had brought him there or how many hours he'd been out in the cold. I looked at my son, 42 years old, gutted, shaking on the steps of the store I'd built from nothing, and I put the key in the door. "Come inside," I said. "It's cold." He got to his feet slowly, the way a man rises when his body has been keeping score for weeks, and all the tallies are coming in at once. I brought him to the small table in the back room, put the kettle on, made coffee, dropped bread in the toaster, and set a plate in front of him without asking if he wanted it. He looked down at it, then something behind his eyes gave way, something that had been held under enormous pressure for months, and he drove both fists against his mouth, and his shoulders began to shake. He wept with his whole body, the kind of weeping that has no performance left in it. No audience to manage, the kind that simply takes over when there is nothing remaining to hold it at bay. I sat across from him and let it pass through him. My chest ached with something I couldn't sort into separate pieces: love, grief, anger, exhaustion, and underneath all of it, something older and plainer that took me a moment to name. Being his father. That part remained. After everything, that part was still true. When it had run its course, he dragged his hands across his face and looked at me with eyes that were raw and swollen and more unguarded than I had seen them in 20 years. "Dad." His voice was barely there. "I am so sorry. I know that doesn't undo any of it. I know that. But I need you to know I mean it." "I know you do," I said. And I believed him. I did. Believing him didn't put back a single dollar of the $117,000. It didn't return one day to Vivian. It didn't recover 6 years of Sunday mornings spent in a small back room of my own house. But it was genuine. And I wasn't going to act as though it wasn't. What do I do now? His voice broke wide open on the last word. I genuinely don't know where to go from here, Dad. Right now you eat, I said and nudged the plate an inch in his direction. And then I have something for you. I walked to the register and came back carrying a plain white envelope, $200 in cash, and a printed bus ticket to Nashville, Tennessee, where my old friend Hank Delacroix ran a warehouse operation and had agreed after a single phone call the week before to give a man a fair chance at honest work. Hank Delacroix, I said, setting it on the table in front of him. He's expecting you by Friday. Work starts at 6:00 in the morning. It's hard work. The pay is what it is. But it's real. Garrett stared at the envelope. His jaw worked. His eyes filled again, and he pressed them shut and breathed through his nose, deliberate, controlled, until he found solid ground again. Then he picked it up with both hands. Why a whisper, barely that? After everything, Dad, why? I thought about Vivian writing in her green journal by lamplight, so I wouldn't have to know until I could bear it. I thought about the boy who used to drift off against my arm on long drives home and pretend he hadn't when he woke. I thought about what my own father said to me once long ago, that mercy wasn't weakness. It was precision, giving someone what they needed, rather than only what they'd earned, because sometimes those were the same and sometimes they weren't, and knowing the difference was what wisdom actually was. Because you're still my son, I said. And because this right here, the two of us at this table with 2 cups of coffee and nowhere else to be, this is what family actually means. Not the easy part. This exact part. Garrett stood. He stood in the doorway a long moment, holding the envelope in both hands, and I could see him reaching for words and coming up short. Nothing large enough for what he was trying to say. In the end, he let go of the search and gave me one single nod, slow, deep, entirely real. Go, I said. Do better. He went. I watched him move down the empty street until the dark of that November morning swallowed him up and he was gone. Then I went back inside, washed both coffee cups with care, and opened the store for the day. Edmund arrived at 9 near, as he always did, coat buttoned against the November chill, coffee mug in his hand. He came through to the back room, saw the 2 cups on the drying rack, and looked at me with those steady eyes that had taken in more of the world than most. He poured himself a coffee, drew out the chair across from mine, and sat down without a word. Some things, when they've been understood by the right person, require no explanation at all. The lawsuit settled in March of 2024. I won't walk you through every detail. Edmund and Noel handled the bulk of it, and the paperwork alone could have stocked half a shelf in any law library. What I'll tell you is this: by the time everything was signed, the court had ordered full restitution of the $51,000 taken from the retirement account. The Meridian loan had been formally declared fraudulent and scrubbed from my credit history, and the Cedarwood Lane property had been sold at fair market value by court order. The proceeds went first to clear the outstanding debts, and what remained after 33 years of careful living was more than nothing, and it came back to my account. Naomi's criminal case was still making its way through the system. I won't claim to know exactly where it will end up. Noel tells me the evidence is solid. I've learned not to build my peace of mind on outcomes that aren't mine to control. What I can tell you is what I did with the rest of the year. In late spring, Edmund and I sat down with Troy and the 2 women who had worked the registers at Pruitt's Market since before Garrett graduated high school, and we talked about what the store might grow into. Not larger, just better. More considered. There was a corner near the coffee station, 12 feet square. Maybe that had done nothing but hold a display of seasonal items no one much reached for. We put 4 chairs and 2 small tables there instead. A newspaper rack. A coffee maker that ran from open until noon. A small handwritten sign on the wall that read simply, "Sit as long as you like." The sign above the door was the last thing we touched. I had someone come out on a Thursday morning in September, and by noon, the faded green lettering that had read Pruitt's Market for 33 years carried something new. Edmund Rafferty stood beside me on the sidewalk and studied it for a long, quiet moment. "Vivian would have liked that," he said. Something tightened in my throat. "Yeah," I said. "She would have." The corner filled up faster than I'd guessed it would. Word moves through a small town the way it always has through Claudette, through the women at the church 2 blocks over, through the men who played chess in Sycamore Green Park on Sunday mornings. By October, all 4 chairs were taken most mornings. By November, I had added 2 more. It was a Wednesday morning in October when Norma Aldcott came in for the first time. She was 75, slight and watchful, her movements carrying the economy of a woman who had stopped wasting effort. She bought a carton of eggs and a loaf of bread, then stood at the far end of the checkout counter as if she'd suddenly lost track of why she'd come. "You're Leonard Pruitt," she said, not a question. "I am," I said. "I saw you on the news last October." She set her grocery bag down and held my gaze directly. "My son has been opening accounts in my name. 3 that I know of. I don't know how to make it stop." My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the weight of recognizing something I had lived myself. I called to Troy to take the register. Then I sat Norma Aldcott down at one of the small corner tables, poured her a coffee, and went to get Edmund. The 3 of us sat together for an hour and a half. Edmund walked her through the first steps: credit report, account verification, FTC report. With the same patient, unhurried precision he had used with me 16 months before. Norma Aldcott's hands trembled slightly as she wrote things down, but her jaw was set, and her eyes never wavered from what was in front of her. When she finally rose to leave, she extended her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the shake in her hands. I didn't know who to ask. "You do now," I told her and took her hand. "Come back anytime." After she left, I stood at the window and watched her make her way carefully down the sidewalk to her car, grocery bag in one hand, notepad in the other. I thought about the first morning I had walked into the Ridgecrest boarding house with 1 box under my arm and no clear plan, and how the right person had set a cup of coffee in front of me and asked the right questions. Sometimes that is all it takes. Sometimes it's everything. Cody rang in November. He'd been staying at Naomi's mother's place in Louisville, Kentucky, school homework still curled up at night with that stuffed dog of his. There was something different in his voice. Hard to name exactly. Just a little more settled, like a boy who'd started paying attention to where he stood. "Grandpa," he said, "I'm okay. I miss you. I miss you too, buddy." Something behind my eyes went warm and quick. "A lot. Can I come see your store one of these days?" "The new one with the new name." "Come whenever you like," I told him. "There's a seat here with your name on it." December rolled in without fanfare. The town strung its lights the same as it did every winter. Over on the corner of Leonard and Comer, the air carried coffee and ink and whatever Troy was pulling out of the oven on Friday mornings, which was usually something with brown sugar and pecans. The 15th fell on a Thursday, and I stayed late after the last customer had gone, resetting the chairs, running a cloth over the tables. Edmund had headed out an hour before, but not before the 2 of us had gotten a second sign up on the wall beside the first. A small rectangle of plain wood, 4 words rendered in Vivian's hand, lifted from the final page of her green journal by a woman at the frame shop, who refused to take any money once I explained where those words had originated. "Be decided. VP." I killed the corner lights, shrugged on my coat, and turned the deadbolt on the front door. Out back, tucked inside the little refrigerator behind the stockroom, I'd been keeping one thing, a bottle of champagne purchased 3 weeks prior, held in reserve for a moment worth marking. I carried it out to the loading dock and stood there alone in the December cold. The cork let go with a soft, clean report. Nothing like the showy burst you'd stage for a crowd, but the sound of something long compressed finally finding air. I filled one glass. I settled onto the concrete step where Garrett had once sat back in November and tipped my head toward the sky, that deep, specific blue that only belongs to December nights, in small towns a star or two, pressing through the light pollution and the clouds. I thought about Vivian. I thought about Cody and the seat I'd promised him. I thought about Norma Aldcott moving along the sidewalk with her notepad. I thought about Edmund across that little back table, 2 cups between us, the silence requiring nothing at all. I lifted my glass toward no one, toward everyone. That's where Leonard's story leaves us, on a loading dock in the cold, one quiet glass raised to the night sky, to everyone and to no one. This didn't come cheap. It cost him years of savings, a marriage he'd believed in, and something harder to name, the version of his son he'd always hoped was still in there somewhere. What he found instead, I believe God placed along the way, precisely when it was needed: a journal, a friend willing to sit in silence, a grandchild's voice on the other end of a phone line. None of it undoes the harm, but it adds up to something. If you take anything from Leonard's story, let it be this. First, review your own accounts regularly. Elder financial abuse most often starts inside the family, quietly, before anyone thinks to look. Second, keep your important documents somewhere only you control. Vivian hid the truth in plain sight because she had no other safe option. Third, mercy and accountability are not opposites. Leonard gave Garrett $200 and a bus ticket, not because what happened was acceptable, but because he chose who he wanted to be when it was over. Fourth, the father stories that matter most are rarely the ones that end cleanly. Sometimes family justice looks like a concrete step, an open sky, and the courage to keep going anyway. If this story moved you, please share it with someone in your life who might need to hear it. A parent, a sibling, a friend who's been too quiet lately. And if you haven't yet, I'd be glad to have you subscribe to Alpha Dad Stories so you don't miss what's coming next. Leave me a thought in the comments. I read them all, and they mean more than you know. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take good care of yourself and of the people who need you.